If you sing without going off key, I'll marry you right here in front of everyone.
If you sing without going off key, I'll marry you right here, in front of everyone. The words sliced through the golden ballroom like a slap. Laughter erupted, glasses clinked, cameras flashed. At the center of it all stood Julian Cross, billionaire superstar, his smile sharp as a blade. Across the room, a young maid froze, her name tag read Grace. She wasn't meant to be seen, much less humiliated. Yet under 1,000 glittering lights, she stood still, holding a tray that trembled in her hands. Julian tilted his head, waiting. The crowd began to chant, "Sing! Sing!" The spotlight burned against her pale face. For a heartbeat, she almost spoke, but stopped. Behind her silence, something else was building. Not fear, not shame, something deeper, something that would soon make everyone in that ballroom regret laughing. Before we begin this emotional story, tell us in the comments from which city you are watching, and don't forget to leave your like to keep following us. The laughter didn't fade right away. It lingered, sharp, nervous, uneasy, like the echo of something people weren't sure they should have found funny. Champagne bubbles rose and burst in the air as conversations broke into whispers. Grace Miller kept her eyes low, the tray still trembling in her grip, her knuckles white around the stem of a glass. She wanted to disappear. The marble floor felt endless beneath her, a mirror that reflected every cruel smile, every phone pointed her way. She heard her own name somewhere in the crowd, mispronounced, mocked, turned into a joke. Julian Cross's voice floated above it all, smooth and careless, the voice of a man who had never been told no. "Come on, sweetheart," he teased, swirling his drink. "Surely you know a tune or two. You work here, don't you? Entertain the man who pays your bills." The crowd tittered again, but the laughter this time felt thinner. Some faces turned away. Others watched with morbid curiosity, the way people slow down to stare at a car crash. Grace swallowed hard, her throat burning with something heavier than shame. Her supervisor, Mrs. Klein, stood frozen near the entrance, mouthing silently, "Don't say anything, just stay quiet." Grace nodded faintly, but deep inside, a pressure was building, the kind that begins as silence and ends as song. Julian leaned against the microphone stand, basking in the attention. His diamond cufflinks caught the light. His smile didn't reach his eyes. To him, this was harmless fun. Another viral moment, another night to prove how untouchable he was. But something about Grace's stillness unsettled him. She wasn't crying, she wasn't running. She was simply standing there, as motionless, calm in a way that didn't fit humiliation. Her gaze, when she finally lifted it, met his across the room. It wasn't anger nor fear, it was something rarer. Pity. Julian's smirk faltered for half a breath. "Guess not," he said, shrugging it off with fake nonchalance. "Ladies and gentlemen, seems like we'll have to find real talent elsewhere tonight." The audience clapped politely, though the energy had shifted. Grace turned, excused herself quietly, and vanished through a service door, the clatter of trays and distant laughter echoing behind her. Inside the dim corridor, she pressed her back against the cold wall. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Why now, she thought, why here? All she had wanted was to finish her shift and make it home before her mother's next medication dose. Yet now, the internet would see her face. The maid who refused to sing. She slid down to the floor, hugging her knees. A soft hum escaped her lips, just one note, barely audible, pure, steady, heartbreakingly beautiful. The sound startled even her. Outside in the ballroom, the crowd was already moving on. But Julian Cross hadn't. He stood by the microphone, staring toward the door where she'd left, his drink forgotten. For a reason he couldn't explain, her silence and that quiet defiance followed him longer than the applause ever did. And somewhere behind that door, Grace made a quiet promise to herself. This wouldn't be how her story ended. By morning, the video had already gone viral. Clips flooded social media, slow-motion shots of Julian Cross laughing, freeze frames of Grace's terrified face, captions screaming, "Billionaire's cruel joke," and "The maid who wouldn't sing." The world devoured the moment. Hashtags trended. Talk shows debated whether it was all staged. Some called it entertainment, others called it bullying. but Grace didn't watch any of it. She was at the bus stop on Sunset Boulevard, wearing the same faded jacket she'd owned for years, a paper coffee cup warming her cold hands. She hadn't told her mother what happened. Mrs. Miller's health had been fragile for months. The last thing she needed was to see her daughter become a public joke. Grace forced a smile every time she walked through the apartment door, pretending everything was fine, hiding the tremor in her hands as she prepared soup and medication. But at night, when the city outside fell quiet, she couldn't help hearing that voice in her head again, Julian's voice, smooth, arrogant, effortless. If you sing without going off key. She hadn't sung since the day she dropped out of the conservatory. Back then, she had been Grace the prodigy. Her professors said she was born with perfect pitch, that her voice could cut through silence like sunlight through glass. Juilliard had accepted her on a full scholarship. Her dream had been real, until her mother collapsed during a rehearsal and Grace packed her bags that same night. She'd promised she'd return someday, but someday never came. Now as the bus rumbled past neon signs and billboards flashing Julian's face, his next concert, his perfume line, his perfect smile, Grace felt something twist inside her. Not envy, not hate, just a raw ache for everything that might have been. At the same time, Julian sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, scrolling through headlines. His PR team had already drafted a statement, a playful moment misinterpreted. His manager wanted him to post a joke, keep the buzz alive. But he didn't reply. He just stared at the still frame of the maid's face on his phone, eyes wide, proud, unbroken. Why couldn't he stop thinking about her? He'd humiliated people before, critics, rivals, even fans, and it never bothered him. But this felt different. Her silence had done what no protest ever could. It made him look small. He poured himself another drink, but it didn't taste right. The laughter from last night replayed in his head, and for the first time it didn't sound victorious. It sounded hollow. Meanwhile, Grace arrived home. Her mother was asleep, soft music playing on the old radio. Grace sat by the window, the city lights flickering against her tired face. Without realizing it, she began to hum again, a low, trembling melody that filled the tiny apartment. And outside, somewhere across the skyline, a man who had mocked her felt an unease he couldn't name. The silence between them wasn't over. It was only beginning. By the third day, there was nowhere Julian Cross could hide from his own face. His smirk, the gesture, the microphone frozen mid-air. It was everywhere. News anchors dissected the incident at the Meridian Gala like it was a national scandal. Influencers stitched reactions calling him arrogant, heartless, out of touch. Even late-night comedians turned his promise into a punchline. If you sing without going off key, I'll marry you, and if you don't, I'll destroy my reputation instead. Julian threw his phone onto the couch and rubbed his temples. People are overreacting, he muttered, though even to himself it sounded weak. His PR manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Evelyn Ford, paced the room. They're not overreacting, Julian. You humiliated a maid, on live television. The optics are awful. He looked out the glass walls of his penthouse. The city glittered beneath him like a stage he no longer controlled. So what do you want me to do? Go down on my knees and apologize to the janitorial staff, Evelyn sighed. At least pretend you have empathy. You've got sponsors threatening to pull out. The board of your label wants you to fix this. Julian turned away, his jaw tight. It was a joke. A joke that made you the villain, she replied. Find her, Julian. Make it right before someone else does. Across the city, Grace Miller was finishing her shift at the hotel laundry when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Miss Miller, a male voice said, this is Tom Rivera from Channel 8. We'd love to have you on our morning show tomorrow, just to share your side of what happened with Mr. Cross. Grace froze. The air around her felt suddenly thinner. I'm not interested, she said quietly. Please hear me out, Tom pressed. You've become a symbol of dignity, Grace. People are standing with you. They want to know who you are. She hung up before he could say more. Dignity. The word stung. Because if people knew the truth, that she was once a scholarship student, that she'd walked away from her dream, they wouldn't see dignity. They'd see failure. She placed her phone down and folded towels with trembling hands. Her mother's soft coughing echoed from the next room. There was no space for fame in their world, only survival. But when she went online that night, curiosity got the better of her. The headline glowed on the screen: Grace Miller, the maid who silenced a billionaire. Her face, captured mid-glance, filled the page. The comment section was a storm, half mocking, half admiring. One caught her attention. Her voice deserves to be heard. Grace stared at the line until her vision blurred. She hadn't sung in years. But maybe it was time someone finally listened. Julian Cross had faced scandals before, broken contracts, wild headlines, jealous rumors, but nothing like this. This one had a soul. Every time he opened his phone, he saw her face. The maid. The silence. The look that had stripped his confidence bare. "Do the apology," Evelyn said again that morning, sliding a tablet toward him. The press statement was already written. He barely glanced at it. "It sounds fake," he said flatly. "It's supposed to sound humble," she snapped. "That's as close as you'll get." He stood by the window, jaw tight, watching the sunrise crawl across the skyline. "You think a video will fix this?" Evelyn sighed. "No, but it'll buy you time. You need to find her, Julian. Look her in the eye, make it real." Julian said nothing. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Expensive, empty, tired. Grace, meanwhile, was sweeping the lobby floor when her supervisor approached with a strange smile. "Someone's here to see you," Mrs. Klein whispered. "She says she's from a production company." Grace frowned. Her first instinct was fear. More reporters, more cameras. But when she saw the woman waiting near the entrance, something felt different. She was elegant, calm, maybe in her 40s. "Grace Miller?" she asked, offering a hand. "I'm Nora Bennett, talent producer for the Rising Star Project. We feature real voices, people with stories that move hearts." Grace blinked. "I think you have the wrong person." Nora smiled gently. "I don't think I do. I saw that video, Grace. You didn't sing, but you didn't need to. There was strength in your silence. That's rare." Grace's stomach tightened. "You want to make a story out of me?" "I want to give you a stage," Nora said softly. "If you still have your voice, we'll help you find it again." Grace shook her head, overwhelmed. "That part of my life is over." Nora didn't argue. She simply handed her a card. "Dreams don't die, Grace. They wait." Then she turned and left. Across the city, Julian sat before a camera in his penthouse, wearing a grey sweater meant to make him look human. The PR team had dimmed the lights just right, softened his tone, scripted every word. He looked straight into the lens. "I want to sincerely apologize to Miss Grace Miller," he said. "My comment at the gala was inappropriate and hurtful. I never intended to embarrass her or anyone. I've reached out privately to make things right." The words tasted bitter. He hated how rehearsed they sounded. But when the video went live, something unexpected happened. It didn't calm the storm. It fueled it. The comments poured in. "He's faking it. Look at his eyes. No remorse. You can't buy respect, Julian." He slammed the laptop shut. For the first time, he felt cornered not by fame, but by truth. And somewhere in a quiet apartment filled with unpaid bills and old music sheets, Grace held Nora's card in her hand, staring at it for a long, trembling minute before whispering to herself, "Maybe. One more time." The night air smelled of rain and exhaust when Grace finally walked into the old rehearsal studio on Franklin Avenue. The place hadn't changed since her student days. The same peeling posters on the wall, the same faint scent of rosin and dust. Only the piano looked older, its keys yellowed with time. She stood there for a long moment, her reflection dim in the glass. She could almost see the girl she used to be, head high, voice full of dreams. Now she was a maid in borrowed clothes, staring at ghosts. Grace took a breath. The first note that left her throat was fragile, almost afraid to exist. But the next came steadier, then another. Within minutes, the room filled with something pure, trembling, alive. Her hands shook when she stopped. She'd forgotten how much singing hurt, not her voice, but everything it awakened. The memories, the sacrifices, the ache of her mother's fading strength. From the corner, Nora Bennett smiled softly. "It's still there," she said. Grace turned, startled. "You stayed?" "I wanted to hear it," Nora replied. "Grace, This isn't just about a song. It's about reclaiming the part of you he tried to humiliate. Don't let him have the last note." Grace looked away, swallowing tears. "It's been years, Nora. I don't even know if I can—" "You can," Nora said gently. "And when you're ready, we'll record. I'll take care of the rest." Across the city, Julian Cross sat in a dark recording booth, surrounded by platinum records that suddenly meant nothing. His producer was talking, but he wasn't listening. Every sound, every lyric felt hollow. "Julian," Evelyn's voice came through his phone. "The Foundation Galas board wants you to step down as ambassador. Sponsors are freezing contracts. This isn't going away." He rubbed his temples. "They'll move on." "They won't," she said. "Not this time. You need to face her." Julian hesitated. "Face her? She probably hates me." "Maybe," Evelyn said, "but that's the point. People forgive sincerity, not silence." He looked down at his hands, hands that had once built an empire on applause. For the first time, they felt empty. That night, Julian's car pulled up outside the modest apartment complex where Grace lived. He didn't know exactly what he'd say. Maybe, "I'm sorry." Maybe nothing at all. But as he stepped out, his presence drew quiet stares. A billionaire in a neighborhood of rusted mailboxes and flickering streetlights, it was the wrong world for him, and he knew it. Through a window, he saw her. Grace, sitting beside her mother, reading aloud from a book. The room glowed warm and soft. It was everything his life wasn't. He didn't knock, he couldn't, not yet. Instead, he slipped a note beneath her door. Just 3 words, written in his own hurried handwriting. "I owe you." Inside, Grace found it minutes later. She stared at the folded paper, her heart pounding, unsure whether to feel anger or pity. Somewhere deep down, though, she knew this wasn't the end. The real song was only beginning. The stage lights felt colder than she remembered. Grace stood behind the curtain of the small theater Nora had rented for the Rising Star project, her heart beating so loud it drowned out the murmurs of the audience. It wasn't a gala crowd this time. No gowns, no diamonds, just faces, ordinary people, cameras, hope. She hadn't planned to say yes, but Nora's words had echoed for days. Don't let him have the last note. And maybe for the first time in years, Grace wanted to take something back that life had stolen. Her dress was simple, soft blue fabric, borrowed from the wardrobe rack. Her mother's bracelet, polished and shining, wrapped around her wrist like a promise. Behind the audience, unnoticed at first, a tall man entered quietly, hands buried in the pockets of a dark coat. Julian Cross kept his head low, the brim of his cap shadowing his face. He didn't belong here, but he couldn't stay away. Nora caught sight of him. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Grace didn't know he was there. Not yet. The host stepped up to the microphone. "Tonight," she said, "we welcome a voice that almost never got to be heard. A woman who reminds us that sometimes silence is the strongest note of all. Please, welcome Grace Miller." The applause was gentle, respectful. Grace stepped into the light, her throat dry. For a second, everything blurred. The audience, the cameras, the stage. Her fingers trembled around the microphone. Then she closed her eyes. The first sound that escaped her was soft, trembling, almost a prayer. A single pure note that sliced through the stillness. The room hushed instantly. Every vibration carried years of pain and love and loss, all tangled into one fragile melody. Backstage, Nora pressed a hand to her chest. Even the crew stopped moving. It wasn't a performance. It was confession in music. Julian froze. The voice hit him like something he didn't deserve to hear. Too raw, too honest. It was her. The same voice from the old recording he used to play late at night. The one that once belonged to Rosa Miller, her mother. He hadn't known. He'd humiliated her daughter. His chest tightened. Every word he'd said at the gala now burned in his ears. On stage, Grace's voice grew steadier, lifting higher with each note. The fear melted into something luminous, courage, maybe even joy. For the first time in years, she wasn't singing for approval. She was singing for herself. When she finished, the silence that followed was vast and electric. Then a wave of applause broke through, rising until the entire room was standing. Grace lowered the microphone, eyes glistening. She bowed slightly, and that's when she saw him. Julian. Their eyes met. The air between them thickened with everything unsaid. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, just stood there breathing, as if waiting to see who he really was beneath all that noise. And for the first time in his life, Julian Cross felt speechless. Backstage was chaos, lights flashing, reporters pushing, producers shouting instructions. Grace stood under the edge of the curtain, her breath uneven, still trying to process the applause echoing in her ears. Then she heard it, his voice. "Grace." She turned. Julian Cross stood a few feet away, the cameras already catching up to him. He looked nothing like the man from the gala. His suit was gone, his hair undone, his face bare of performance. For once there was no spotlight on him, only eyes waiting to see what he'd do next. "Don't," she said quietly. "Not here." But he stepped closer anyway. "I needed to see you. I needed to say—" "You've said enough," she interrupted, her voice trembling but firm. "You said it in front of the world. You made me small. You laughed while they laughed at me." The crew began to gather around. Phones lifted. The moment was irresistible. The billionaire and the maid face to face again. Julian lowered his head, his voice breaking. "You're right. I was cruel. I don't even know why I did it. Ego, arrogance. Maybe because I thought the stage belonged to me." Grace crossed her arms. "And now, you think an apology in front of cameras makes it right?" He looked at her, eyes shining with something almost like shame. "No, but I can't undo it. All I can do is face it." For a moment, neither spoke. The noise around them dimmed, just two people standing in the echo of what pride had broken. Then Grace took a slow breath. "You want to fix it?" she asked softly. "Then stop trying to turn it into a show. Respect isn't a headline, Julian." The words hit him harder than any accusation. She started to walk away, but he followed. "Grace, wait." She turned sharply. "Why? So you can tell me how sorry you are? Or offer me money to keep quiet?" He flinched. "No, Because that's what people like you do," she said. "You throw money at pain and hope it stops echoing, but it doesn't. You don't get to decide what my voice is worth." Her tone was low, controlled, but each word was a blade. Julian could feel the truth in it, cutting through the noise of his fame. The cameras caught every second. And yet, in that silence, she wasn't performing. She was reclaiming. Grace turned toward the stage again, where the applause still lingered like a heartbeat. "You once promised you'd marry me if I sang without going off key," she said, her eyes meeting his one last time. "I sang, Julian, perfectly in tune. But I don't want your ring. I just want respect." Then she walked past him, straight into the crowd. And this time they didn't see a maid. They saw a woman who had taught a billionaire the meaning of dignity. Julian stayed behind, motionless, the echo of her voice still vibrating somewhere deep inside his chest, a sound he knew he would never forget. The next morning, America woke up talking about Grace Miller. Clips of the backstage confrontation flooded every platform, her calm voice, her words slicing through Julian Cross's arrogance like quiet thunder. Respect isn't a headline. That sentence alone became a movement. Hashtags spread faster than wildfire. Respect Grace. Voice of dignity. Not your show. Talk shows praised her composure. Celebrities reposted her video. Even teachers in schools played the clip, telling their students about the maid who spoke truth to a billionaire. Grace's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters, agents, talk shows, podcasts, everyone wanted a piece of her story. Nora handled most of them, protecting her like a shield. "Don't let them turn your dignity into content," she kept warning. But there were offers that made Grace hesitate. A scholarship fund, a chance to study again, even one from the same conservatory she'd left years ago. The idea terrified her as much as it thrilled her. That night she sat by her mother's bedside reading aloud softly. Mrs. Miller, frail but alert, smiled weakly. "You sang again," she whispered. Grace nodded, her throat tight. "Just once. I think I needed to remember who I was." Her mother took her hand, eyes glistening. "You never forgot." The world just stopped listening for a while. Meanwhile, Julian Cross watched the same video in silence. He'd seen it 100 times. But now, every frame hurt differently. Not because of the hate, not even the ridicule, but because she was right. He had built his empire on applause, but none of it meant anything if he couldn't look at himself without shame. The mansion felt empty, the gold records like echoes of a man he no longer wanted to be. He turned off his phone and walked through his quiet home until he reached the old piano by the window, the one he hadn't touched in years. His fingers hesitated over the keys, then began to play. Slowly, hesitantly. A melody he remembered from somewhere deep in the past. It took him a few bars to realize. It was her melody, the one she'd sung on that stage. He stopped, breathing heavily, then reached for his phone. Not to post, not to call Evelyn, not to protect his image. He called Nora Bennett. "Nora," he said quietly, "I don't want interviews. I don't want a press conference. I just want to do something real." There was a long pause on the other end. "What do you mean, real?" she asked. Julian looked out at the city, the lights blurring through the glass. "She deserves more than an apology. I want to fund a full scholarship program for singers who had to give up their dreams like she did, in her name. But no cameras, no PR." Nora's voice softened. "If you mean that, Julian, maybe that's the first honest song you've written in years." He hung up without answering, but a strange calm settled in his chest. For the first time, he wasn't acting for the world, he was finally facing himself. The foundation launched quietly. No press release, no red carpet, no performance attached to Julian Cross's name. A single announcement appeared on the website of the Los Angeles Conservatory: the Grace Miller Scholarship for Voices of Promise, supporting students who paused their dreams to care for family. Grace only found out 3 days later. She was in the kitchen, folding laundry and humming, when Nora called, her voice shaking with disbelief. "He did it, Grace. No cameras, no logos. Just your name, and a fund that's already helping 10 students." Grace froze. "What are you talking about?" Nora sent her the link. Grace read it once, then again, her vision blurring. She sat down slowly, pressing a hand against her chest. Her name, her story. Not turned into pity, not into scandal, but into hope. Her mother looked up from the table. "What happened?" Grace smiled softly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "Something good, Mom. Something I didn't expect." Across the city, Julian walked alone through the empty hall of the same hotel where everything had started. The ballroom looked smaller now. The gold didn't shine as bright. He ran his hand along the piano by the corner, the one where he had once mocked a maid. He had sent a short letter to the conservatory, asking that his involvement stay anonymous. He didn't want applause this time. He just wanted to leave something right behind him. As he turned to leave, a familiar voice stopped him. "I thought you'd only come back here for another party." He turned. Grace stood by the door, dressed simply, her hair tied back, eyes calm. The light from the chandelier reflected softly against her bracelet. Julian swallowed. "How did you—" "Nora told me," she said. "About the scholarship." He nodded slowly. "It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about balance, maybe." She studied him for a moment. "You didn't put your name on it." "I didn't earn the right to," he said quietly. "It's yours." It always was. They stood in silence. The air between them was no longer heavy, just fragile, honest. Grace took a step closer. "You know," she said softly, "for a long time, I thought I wanted revenge, to make you feel what I felt that night. But standing here now, I don't." He looked up, eyes tired but clear. "What do you want then?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "For people to remember the song, not the scandal." Julian nodded. "Then maybe we finally understand each other." He reached out as if to shake her hand, but she surprised him, not with forgiveness but with quiet grace. She simply nodded, her eyes full of calm strength, then turned toward the exit. Her steps echoed through the empty ballroom, steady, free, resolute. Julian stayed behind, listening. The sound of her leaving was softer than music, but somehow it felt like the final note he'd been waiting for all along. Months passed. The noise faded, but the melody remained. The Grace Miller Scholarship grew quietly, like a song passed from one voice to another. Students from across the country began sending letters, Stories of mothers, sacrifices, dreams reignited. Grace read every one of them, her heart swelling with something that felt bigger than pride. It felt like peace. She had started teaching part-time at a community center, guiding young singers who couldn't afford lessons. It wasn't fame, but it was something truer. Every time she stepped in front of a student, she remembered the girl she used to be, trembling, unseen, afraid to sing, and she smiled because that girl had finally found her voice again. Her mother's health had stabilized, and on quiet evenings, they sat together by the window while Grace practiced. The same melody always returned, the one she had sung on that small stage months ago, the one that had rewritten both their lives. Julian Cross disappeared from headlines. He sold his luxury penthouse and moved into a smaller home outside Malibu where no paparazzi waited. He stopped touring. Instead, he spent his days mentoring new artists through his label, not as their boss, but as their listener. One afternoon, as he walked past a cafe near the beach, he heard a familiar sound drifting from the open door. A voice, soft and clear, singing one of his old songs. A young girl stood by a small stage, her voice trembling at first, then finding confidence. He stopped to listen unnoticed. When she finished, the crowd clapped politely. She smiled, shy but proud. Julian felt something shift in his chest, the same quiet joy he'd felt when Grace looked at him that last night. He turned to leave, but on the cafe wall a poster caught his eye. Community Recital, Students of Grace Miller. He smiled to himself, a small, genuine smile, and walked away. That evening, Grace stood backstage at the recital, straightening a young girl's collar and whispering encouragement. The girl looked nervous. "What if I mess up?" she asked. Grace knelt beside her, her voice calm and warm. "Then you breathe. You find your note again. The world doesn't end when you miss one. It begins when you try again." The girl nodded, smiling through her fear. When the lights dimmed and the first note filled the air, Grace closed her eyes. Somewhere far away, she imagined Julian hearing it, understanding that redemption isn't applause. It's the silence that follows when the truth finally lands. She didn't need to see him again. His chapter in her story was written, sealed with the quiet strength of forgiveness. Outside, the night breeze carried the music into the city, gentle, steady, free. And for those who listened, it sounded like more than just a song. It sounded like dignity finding its voice. The ballroom, the laughter, the humiliation, all of it had faded into memory. What remained was the echo of a voice that refused to break. Grace Miller never sought fame. She didn't need it. What she found was something far more powerful, the kind of respect that can't be bought, the kind that is earned in silence and courage. Julian Cross learned that night that apologies don't live in words, they live in change. The stage that once fed his ego became the place where he finally listened. And in listening, he began to heal. Two lives that collided in cruelty found a strange balance in truth, not through love, not through revenge, but through dignity. Grace's name became a symbol not of scandal, but of resilience. And somewhere beyond the applause and headlines, a quiet song continued. The song of second chances that don't come from luck, but from conscience. Because in the end, what defines us isn't how loudly we speak, but how deeply we learn to hear. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this heart-touching story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And above all, thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul. And before you go, watch the story I leave here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.